Well, today is June 17th, 2016. Kay Wagner is talking with Dr. Tom Roberts, a retired pediatrician specializing in pediatric diabetes. Dr. Roberts attended medical school and completed his residency at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, followed by an internship at Lutheran Hospital La Crosse in 1969. He joined the system, the Gundersen Health System, in 1971 and retired in
let's see. Well, I was completely done in 2011.
Okay.
I basically retired from full-time practice in 2008.
So that would be about
I was 40 years
40
here.
years. 40 years of service.
Yeah,
Well, welcome. We're glad to have you here today. You grew up in North Dakota.
correct.
Please tell us about your family history, education, growing up in North Dakota.
Well, North Dakota was a great place to be a child. It was safe and comfortable. I was the second of two children in my family. My mother worked in her hospital as a nurse in her hospital for 50 years. And she was probably a major influence in my life in that regard. My father ended up running into the Great Depression, so his eventual hope was to actually go into medicine as well, but he only was able to go to college for 1 year, and then the Depression hit, and he was actually sponsored in college by a local physician in our community, but when the stock market went down, he was no longer able to do that. So my father worked as a manager of an Elks Club. It was interesting. My family lived in a one-bedroom apartment for the first 9 years of my life. We got our first car when I was like 7. So I got my first we got our first television set in the family when I was 12, but I survived it all.
Was your sibling male, female?
Older sister.
Okay. What did she grow up to do?
My sister got a degree from North Dakota State University in dietetics, but went on to actually be a food broker.
Mm-hmm.
And that was predominantly the work that she did throughout her whole career.
How did you decide to become a physician?
Well, my mother was a strong influence, and then at age 15 I developed type 1 diabetes and had a couple doctors that I admired a great deal, and decided I wanted to become a physician. And actually, I've always been, I guess, a little closed-minded, but I decided even when I was in high school that I wanted to be a pediatrician. I never thought about being anything else.
What do you think rooted that in your mind? Was there
Well, the fact that I had diabetes and I wanted to work with kids with that, but also I just like kids, and so that was the only thing I ever thought of and ever wanted to be. When I went to medical school, I didn't think about anything else.
It sounds like your mom was a strong influence or a mentor.
Very strong.
Were there others in your life and career that also stood out as great influences?
Yeah, during my medical school years and my residency at Madison, there was a Dr. Charles Lobeck, who was the chairman of the Department of Pediatrics, and subsequently became an assistant dean at the medical school there, who was a strong influence. And then I was obviously smitten by Dr. Overholt. I was in his first residency class here. I actually was the very first medical student who did a presentation to Dr. Overholt. I was working with Dr. Kermit Newcomer when I was here as a medical student, and Dr. Overholt was visiting to look at the institution at that time, and I had to present to him. He was probably the most influential person in my career. I mean, he taught everybody to be very practical and solid, and I always admired him greatly.
Was there someone who pushed you competitively or otherwise that made you a better doctor?
I really don't think so. I mean, I think I always have been fundamentally a fairly competitive person, but I'm also fairly laid back, so I didn't feel pressure in that regard. I mean, going to medical school, the biggest pressure is always to get into medical school. And then once you get to medical school, to get to residency. And those were areas where I had a little bit of concern, but I did very well in medical school and in my residency. So it wasn't a huge issue.
How did you first hear about Gunderson?
I was here as a medical student back in, it would have been the winter of, or actually about December of '67. I was a preceptor here. At that time, the University of Wisconsin had a program where medical students would go off for about 11 weeks to get away from the university and see how medicine's practiced in the real world. And I, wanting to go in pediatrics, I wanted to go to a multi-specialty clinic rather than going to a family practice situation. And so I was assigned here. That's how I got it started here. And it was love at first sight for me. I mean, I was extremely comfortable from day one here. As I said, I worked with a lot of really fine doctors at that time and thought this was a really great way to practice medicine.
And it continued to be that.
Oh yeah, I truly enjoyed it all along. I had interesting experience during that preceptorship, and that I knew I wanted to go into pediatrics, but I felt my medical education wasn't complete in the sense that there were a lot of things I still wanted to do. So I opted, and you could do it at that time, to take a rotating internship as opposed to going into a straight pediatric internship. At the time, Sig Sievertson was the director of medical education here, and he and I were talking, and I just said I really like this place a lot, and I think I'm going to list you as number one on basically we go through a lottery sort of system as to get into your residencies. And he said, well, you're our number one candidate too. So when it came down to the announcement of internship and residency programs, I never went to pick mine up because I knew where I was going. I had the woman in the medical school office was looking all over campus for me because I didn't show up, but I knew where I was going. So
Great. How many clinicians were here when you joined the clinic?
well, I don't remember at the time that I was here as an intern, but I was doctor number 86 when I joined the staff. Now, there probably were not 86 doctors at the time, because I think those numbers started from the beginning, and there were people like old Dr. Carlson was here, and some of the very senior Gundersons were still around but not really practicing at the time. So I would guess that they were somewhere in the 70s when I joined the clinic.
Everybody remembers their number.
Yes. Well, we had to sign. You had to, whenever you were billing, you had to put your billing number down, and so I remember number 86.
You were among the first of the non-Gunderson members recruited. Was that challenging?
Not at all. I was treated so warmly when I first came here as a medical student. And I mean, the thing that was really cool as a medical student was to be first assistant to a Dr. Adolf Gunderson on a surgical procedure. I mean, there'd be third-year residents in Madison, a surgical program, that didn't get the experience that I got. And they treated us so well. I mean, they invited us out to dinner. We had all kinds of things there. Dr. George Murphy, who was one of the surgeons here, arranged for another intern and I to go out fishing on the river with one of his river rat friends. I mean, a lot things like that that just were, it was just a very friendly, easy place. I mean, when I left here and went back to Madison, my biggest concern was that there wouldn't be a place for me when I got finished, because as soon as I was offered a place, I stopped looking at any other place.
How is pediatrics, whether diabetes or cleft palate treatment, which you were also involved in, how has that evolved over your career in the past 20, say, years?
Well, when I first came here, I had an interest in children with diabetes, and the doctors here knew that, and so they started sending me all of the kids that would have diabetes. And back at the time, the systems that we had for managing those kids was fairly crude. And we did not have an organized system for doing it. And over the years, gradually, and with the help of nurse practitioners, and the first one that were actually not nurse practitioners, but diabetes nurse educators. First one I worked with was Gene Bullion, and we established the first diabetes team, and then Sue Wolf, who was a nurse in pediatrics, when Gene was actually moving on to a different position, Sue wanted to go into that program, and that got the children's diabetes program moving very well. And there was a point in time where, according to one of the representatives who represented the insulin pump companies, we had one of the largest children's diabetes programs in the Midwest that was not centered in a university center. But over the years, the ability to accurately manage these kids and what improved dramatically. It still is a chore, and I don't know that it's changed an awful lot. One of the things that was always frustrating to me was that you would get articles in the newspaper about a cure is around the corner, and there's going to be this device that's going to make it really easy, and I had to always be kind of tapping down the parents of my kids, telling them, you know, let's be patient. This isn't necessarily true. We got to hang in there and do things the right way. But, you know, I think establishing a team program to do that was a huge benefit to our patients, and I think brought us, got us to the point where we were getting referrals from 100 miles away for kids to come and have their diabetes managed here.
Do you think that technology has helped?
Oh, technology has been a tremendous advantage. I mean, when I was first diagnosed with diabetes, the way you monitored diabetes was to test urine, which was an extremely inaccurate and very onerous process to do. By the time I was graduating from medical school, they were getting their first home glucose testing that you could do, but it was done comparing a strip to a series of colors on the container to try to guess what the blood sugar was, and then finally they got to monitors that you could actually get a number, and then it got to where it required less and less blood and more sophisticated lancets to draw the blood so it wasn't as painful, and so it really tremendously improved that. And then we developed the hemoglobin A1C test, which helped us to determine long-term control better. So technology made a huge difference. It allowed the kids to live a more normal life, never a completely normal life, but much more normal. And working with talented dietitians, Mary Stokas was one of the first ones I worked with, and then Nancy Ernst, who gave a practical approach to kids to help them choose their diets that allowed them to still eat things that kids want to eat, which makes a whole difference as opposed to when I first was diagnosed. Everything was very strict. You counted everything that, and it, you know, the tendency, frankly, was to say, I'm not going to do this. You know, if we could make it so kids could live with it, it was a lot better in that regard.
And what about in the field of cleft palate treatment?
Well, that was something that I kind of just stumbled into, and my role was really just to provide basic pediatric support. I was a person there to make sure that we didn't lose the forest for all the trees. We were very lucky to have Dr. John Clemens and Larry Severide, who were trained at the University of Iowa and were superb cleft palate surgeons. And then Dr. Conley came along, and these guys were doing work that was better than an institution 75 miles to the west of us by far. And they were doing a great job, and they're great human beings, so that this got to be an area that was really fun, and getting to see these kids from being tiny babies when their parents were devastated by this to working with these kinds of guys. And that was again a multidisciplinary clinic that included not only the surgeons but speech pathologists, dentists. We had Dr. Fritz Miller, who was a general dentist in town, orthodontist in town, who would come and provide services to these kids here. It was just great.
Well, you mentioned the pediatrics diabetes team, and then you also, among your many accomplishments, was the First Child Protective Services team as well.
Yeah, that was an interesting story as well, and that when I first arrived here, I didn't have any special interest in children that had been abused. I mean, it was just part of everything, general pediatric training that I had. But I ended up with a child in the emergency room who just gotten here on a bus, had 11 fractures, and there was really nothing to take care of it. And at that time, the physicians were relatively reluctant to report child abuse, so that with the social workers here in the institution, we established the First Child Protective Services team, which we got the medical staff, which was a major accomplishment, to agree that they would allow us to serve as basically the reporting body, so that anybody, a nurse, a janitor, could report to this team if there was a child who was where there was suspicion that they might have been abused. And then we took over from there, investigated it, and most of the time I would end up being the person that would end up going to court to testify there. And then as time went on, there were people in the institution who had a greater interest in this than I did, and I was needing to do more with diabetes, so it moved on to Dr. Ken Kolb, and now Dr. Budzak have been doing it. But the major accomplishment was to get the medical staff to agree that anybody who was suspected of abuse could be reported. that took the burden off of some of the orthopedists who didn't want to report. They didn't want to have to deal with all the other parts of this. But it was that was the first big thing, was to get the medical staff to say, okay, you can handle this.
What happened to the boy that arrived on the bus?
The child was, it was interesting that that the parents were not found guilty of child abuse because they couldn't prove that the abuse occurred in the state of Wisconsin. The child, however, was removed from the parents. So the child was protected, was put into foster care and hopefully adopted. I don't know that, but I mean, it was just a terrible, terrible awakening to me. And you know, it's something that there was a need at the time, so I subsequently developed whatever expertise I could do. Dr. Overholt even somehow got me to speak to the State Medical Association about 8 years ago, but you know, it was just one of those things that happened.
Did the parents put the boy on the bus?
Well, he was with the parents.
Oh, the parents were with
They
him.
were with him, but the child was fussy, and they brought it into the emergency room. But he had all these fractures. It was just awful.
Well, you were highly involved and held many leadership roles in both the clinic and the hospital, including both foundations. What were some of the highlights, perhaps struggles, and memories of those roles?
Well, I was recruited to be in the Lutheran Hospital Foundation by Barbara Newcomer, and the highlight of that was getting to meet a number of really dedicated people from our community who were really interested and dedicated to the hospital. And at that time, the hospital was completely different from the clinic and the foundation. The interesting thing was that the clinic foundation got lots of bucks, but the hospital foundation had lots of support in terms of number of people that were interested in it. I mean, we had more donors per se, albeit smaller donors, than the clinic foundation did. And the two of us were kind of at loggerheads for a while. It really came to, the biggest struggle, frankly, came down to when the clinic and hospital merged. And that was a big struggle because basically they wanted the hospital foundation to go away. And I, along with Jess Ondell, fought very hard to have the hospital foundation members be an integral part of a combined board of the two organizations. I made some enemies in that process because we did want to have that involvement, and they frankly needed us. The Heritage Club, which everybody is familiar with, that was a Lutheran Hospital Foundation organization. So it was not a Gunderson Foundation, and we struggled to maintain our identity. I mean, over years it all smoothed out and everything was fine. But
it's interesting to hear that, because now you see it and it looks like it's seamless. But having also been here at the time when we were trying to integrate, it was a little bit of a struggle.
Dr. Othoff didn't want to talk to me for quite a while. He was a very formidable and it was very influential person in my life, so that was really, really difficult for me.
What do you think he would say today?
I think he would probably say everything worked just fine, and there was nothing there, you know. But he was not happy with me for.
Any other memories of some of the roles that you played in leadership?
Well, I was involved in the very early aspects of the Children's Miracle Network, and that was maybe one of the most rewarding things I did, because that was we started out and we developed basically the procedures and policies in terms of who and what we would award grants to. Don Smith, who was an administrator of the hospital at the time, was a key member of that organization to help develop those things. And that was, again, and that fundamentally started as a hospital-based organization, and which was eventually moved into the combined foundations. But that was, we were unique in the sense that we were giving the money predominantly to families to take care of needs that were not normally met by insurance, or if people didn't have insurance. We weren't like some of the CMN organizations generating large funds that would go into the building per se, and buy equipment for the organization. We weren't into that as much as serving individual families, which I thought was very unique. I got to meet some wonderful people from WXOW over the course of those years, and some of them were they were as actively interested in this as anybody around.
Bill Hull.
Bill Hull. I think Susan Jones is one who sticks in my mind. I remember her crying like mad when the final totals came in one time. There were just a bunch of people that were real active, and we had at that time we had the big telethons generating in the hospital lobby, and that was a really unique thing to do.
And then I think it moved out to Valley View Mall.
Yeah, I was never involved with it I was never involved per se with a telethon out there. I stayed on that committee for 25 years, so I was on it for a long time.
How did the medical education and research efforts at Gunderson affect or enhance your clinical practice?
Well, I think it goes back to a lot to Dr. Overholt's philosophies, and that you can't learn unless you teach, and that the whole process, you need to continually be learning as you go on, and having medical students, which we had almost all the time in pediatrics, was a tremendous opportunity to continue to share with a gift that we'd been given before. And we did have, for a brief period of time, a residency program. Dr. Marr was one of our residents that we had, but it was the opportunity to learn, and the other thing that we did, which was unique for a private institution, was having basically a pediatric teaching service, and you'd be assigned to that over the course of a month, where your only responsibility was predominantly taking care of hospitalized patients and working with the students and whatever residents we had at the time. Great opportunity to have a sort of a university-based teaching and learning experience in a practicing situation. My primary goal throughout my life was to actually practice pediatrics, not to do research and other things, but this gave me an opportunity to have the best of both worlds. And I did that, I worked on the pediatric hospital-based service until I retired in '68. Since the last time I did it.
You are a loyal donor to the foundation, and for that we thank you. Tell us why you contribute.
Well, the foundation, first off, did a lot of good things for me. it provided money for my diabetes-based patients. Um, Obviously, it provided money to help educate me during my residence, during my internship year. I just believe in the kind of programs that they have, the ongoing education program. I mean, I benefited from that in that every day I'd go to a conference at noon. I mean, and that money had to come from somewhere, you know, and so I believe that the foundation is the best place for me to put my money that I've given to charities, and we'll continue to support it as long as I'm alive.
Well, thank you. Thinking back to your tenure at Gunderson, what would your colleagues say that you were known for?
Oh boy. um, that's an interesting question. I think I was known for the fact that I really loved my work. I loved kids. I think I was easy to work with for both the medical staff and the nursing staff and the parents. I don't know.
Good things.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I felt good about the place. I mean, I told people, you know, the paranoia in the medical world, if you like, with pediatrics is we're the tiniest minnow in the deepest hole in the ocean in terms of the credibility, as opposed to some of the subspecialists. But I've told people that if I could start all over again and end up where I did, I wouldn't hesitate.
What would you like to be known for?
Boy, that I was a good doctor, that I was a good person, that I was easy to work with, that I made a difference in some people's lives.
Do you have a favorite story about Gunderson? Patient, miraculous day, worst day, something that sticks out in your mind?
Boy. Well, one that sticks out in my mind is one I'm not terribly proud of, but I diagnosed a child with diabetes by doing a spinal tap on the child. The child was extremely ill when it came in, and it was only 11 months old, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, and I was afraid it had meningitis, and I did this spinal tap, and the sugar in the spinal fluid was way elevated. That was when I went, you know, why did I? That's a very unorthodox way to establish a diagnosis of diabetes. I guess one that I remember that will stick with me forever, as I was out with my family one day at a restaurant, and this cute little girl, she could have been Annie. I mean, she had bright red hair. She walked up and started stroking my arm, and in a voice that the whole restaurant could hear, pronounced that I was her doctor. And that really, you know, that's one I'll never ever forget. I had my patients gave me a tremendous send-off when I initially retired, and to see all these patients come back, and I've got a great big book that they all signed. Those things really stick in my heart. And the people I worked with mainly, I think I worked with a bunch of doctors over the course of the years that very few of them did I dislike. I mean, most of the people they're here for the right reason. They practiced great medicine, you know, so and I that was a very strong memory for me.
You have two sons practicing medicine.
I do.
Did you have any advice or words of wisdom to offer them?
Not really. I was very surprised that my eldest decided to go into medicine, because at the time I was we hadn't developed the nurse advisor's phone system, so on weekends I'd be getting 40 or 50 telephone calls a day, and was working 60, 70-hour weeks, and he kind of said, I don't want any part of that. And he went to undergrad as an engineering student and lasted 1 year doing that, and changed to basically something that would send him into medicine. And he's the best internist I know right now. So he's done well. My second son, I think, always kind of wanted to do something in medicine, and so he was interested in that, and he's a podiatrist now, and I think enjoys that.
Where do they practice?
They're both at Mayo and Eau Claire.
Okay. And then your third son is in information technology here.
Correct.
What is his role?
Well, he is a systems something architect, which makes no sense to me at all.
That's why I asked.
I don't know what he does. He says he does a lot of things. I have to be very careful with him, because I'm very, very ill-equipped to handle technology. I mean, I was old-fashioned all the way, and always have been, and so I mean, he thinks I'm probably an idiot but he's loved his job here, and as far as I can tell, does a great job. He's got my personality, so I think that's a wrong way to put that, but I mean, he's an easygoing guy and likes what he does, so I think he's very happy with what he does here.
What are you doing during your retirement? You've got grandkids and everybody's close, which is good.
Yeah. Yep, I follow my grandkids a lot, play more golf than my body probably should allow me to do. Those are the main things that I do. Got a PhD in grocery shopping. I'm a good window washer. I know how to vacuum pretty well, so I mean, a lot of things.
That's all good. Jay, do you have any questions for Dr. Roberts?
How have you seen the organization change from when you started till when you retired?
It's less personal.
Just keep talking, Dad.
It's less personal than it used to be. We were, and I imagine that's an issue of size, but it's part of it. But it's doctors were more hands-on. I think doctors were more committed to the organization years ago. We were certainly more in control than I think we are now, or what I anticipate. I mean, I personally, after I was no longer chairman of the Department of Pediatrics, became less and less involved in going to meetings here. I mean, and if you look at the medical staff meetings, when I was first here, you probably get 80 or 90% of the staff at a meeting, and now you get maybe 20, I don't know. We I think felt a greater ownership in the organization than we do now. And I think obviously that I don't think I'm speaking out of line to say that a lot of the doctors don't like what the technology has done to take them away from their patients. I mean, I always thought it was a stupid decision to have doctors become typists. I mean, I could sit and talk to my patient like this rather than talk to my patient like that. And I think that's a mistake. And I think in some ways, I think the doctors feel like they're just more a cog in the machine now than what we used to. But, I mean, that being said, I don't know that that's any more of an indictment of this place than it is medicine as a whole. But I mean, I think there have been some mistakes made. I mean, I truly feel that if you honestly talk with the docs that are around today, they can't practice like we did. I mean, I used to see 35, 40 patients in a day. There's no way you could do that with the technology requirements today. And I'm not sure it's better medicine, personally. But I'm an old fogey, so.
Is some of that related to the whole reimbursement practice too?
I don't know. That was the one thing that was neat about the clinic when I joined it, and I still think is somewhat true. I never worried about whether the patient's paid or not. Somebody else took care of that for me, and they obviously did it very well. But I mean, I could just work directly with a patient. I didn't have to think about those things.
It certainly has changed.
Yeah, I just don't. I mean, they're also. We had a lot of social interactions, which I don't see any of it anymore, hardly. And if there are, people don't choose to do them. Now, maybe their lives are busier in other regards, but I mean, I just felt the medical staff was closer to each other years ago than they are now.
I wonder if that has to do with size.
Oh, I think no doubt about it. That's a major factor, but it's not the only one.
No.
I mean, the clinic stopped having annual picnics, a lot of things that Dr. Overholt, frankly, had instituted. But there were annual picnics. There was annual formal dance that they had and dinners that they had, things that brought the medical staff closer together. And they stopped having them.
As did the hospital.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, and they start doing them they'll have the whole staff have a thing down at the lacrosse center, which is about as impersonal as you can get, as opposed to having, just the medical staff.
I missed some of those times too.
Yeah. I just think, it's happened for whatever reason. I think it's a mistake. I think it's a little bit sad to me to think of somebody as a cog as opposed to somebody who's really, really vital. Mm-hmm. And I guess the administration here would think that my perception of that is a mistake, but I think if you talk to a lot of the doctors, they wouldn't say it is.
Well, before we close, are there any items that you'd like to include in your file, photos or anything else that you'd like to share?
I've got some stuff there that's...
Oh, I've got.
Oh, go ahead.
You jumped on the insulin pump
Yes.
bandwagon very early.
Yes.
I seem to recall. Could you talk about that and its impact on kids especially? Because I know there were a lot of places, not here, that they were used on adults.
Yeah.
But children seem to lag behind it a lot of other.
Well, there's really no reason that you can't do anything with a child/parent team that you can't do with an adult. The insulin pump was a tremendous tool that freed up kids, first off, from taking shots, which was one of the big hurdles for them. But it really allowed them tremendous flexibility in terms of timing of meals, size of meals, what you could do. Interestingly, Sue, well, I'll give most of the credit to Sue Wolf in pushing us in that direction. We got a number of kids on the pump, and then the kids started to push me to go on the pump because I wasn't on a pump. I was doing fine with what I was doing, quote, quote, quote. And they pushed me, and I went on the pump, and I absolutely loved what it could do for me. But yeah, we had just, typically a child would develop diabetes, and you'd put them on insulin injections for a while, and you could do that without really too much problem in terms of managing them. And then when it became more difficult, they'd go on pumps, so that usually by 6 months to a year, they were all on a pump. And I think over the course of the years, I probably started a couple hundred kids on pumps. I had 2 of them who chose to go off of the pump. I mean, it just freed up kids so tremendously to live somewhat more a normal life.
Rather than the injections.
The injections were, yeah.
Anything else, Jay?
No, I think I'm done.
I did find a picture that actually was put on a there was a publication that Roger Ziff had out, and it was the head of a folder. It was one of the pictures that was taken for
Oh, that is a great picture.
but yeah, there's some fun pictures there that go back. Dr. Overholt's first class.
We could make copies of.
We've got the original.
Oh, good.
some of
Okay.
these,
All right.
Yeah,
the
I think,
classmates.
yeah, that was taken after we were here. There were the 4 of us who were on staff at that particular point in time. We were probably, at that time at least, we had the highest percentage of any of his classes to return. Of course, there were only 4 out of 7, but there were only 7 of us, so it was different. But yeah,
The percentage. No one needs to know the number.
yeah.
I found something too in I was going through corridors.
Yeah,
This was I think this is when you were elected to the
That
Lutheran
was the-
Hospital Medical
Yeah.
or the board.
yeah. Well, as president of the hospital staff at the time, I was automatically a member of the hospital board, that was my first introduction to community members. That was very interesting. I mean, there was some. I developed a long-term relationship with Jess Ondell, and it started there. And then Jess and I were on the foundation board together for a long time. And he was just a marvelous person.
Was he a large farmer?
No, Jess started as a pharmacist. I think he
Pharmacist.
originally
Okay.
owned Major Drug, but he made probably a small fortune buying Hardee's restaurant.
Oh, and I've got the.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
Jess was there, and yeah, I think if you got that one, that's the.
Are we off camera?